Elvis stopped mid-song, dropped the microphone, and whispered just one word. Mama! The arena fell into absolute silence. 15,000 people held their breath as the king of rock and roll stood frozen on stage, tears streaming down his face. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about Elvis Presley. This is the story of the night Love Me Tender became more than just a song. It became a confession that broke the heart of America. It was August 16, 1977. Las Vegas. The International Hotel. Elvis was scheduled to perform what would become his final concert, though nobody knew it at the time. The venue was packed beyond capacity. Fans had traveled from across the globe just to witness the legend perform one more time. But something was different that night. Those closest to Elvis noticed it immediately. His usual pre-show routine was off. Instead of his characteristic nervous energy, there was a stillness about him. A weight. Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend and stage companion, later recalled how Elvis stood silently in his dressing room for nearly 20 minutes, staring at a faded photograph. The photograph was of Gladys Presley, his mother. She had passed away 19 years earlier, but Elvis carried that picture everywhere. On this night, he held it differently. Like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. Colonel Parker was getting anxious. Charlie remembered. The crowd was restless. But Elvis wouldn't move. He just kept looking at that picture and whispering something none of us could hear. When Elvis finally took the stage, the audience erupted. 15,000 voices screaming his name. The spotlights hit his white jumpsuit and he sparkled like a constellation. This was Elvis in his prime, or so it seemed. He opened with C.C. Ryder, his voice powerful and commanding. The crowd was in ecstasy. But those who knew Elvis best could see something was wrong. His movements were mechanical. His smile never reached his eyes. Between songs, he would scan the audience with an intensity that seemed almost desperate, as if he was searching for something. Or someone. 3 songs into the set, Elvis made an announcement that no one expected. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice softer than usual. Tonight I want to sing something special for you. Something from the heart. The crowd cheered, expecting another high-energy rock number. Instead, Elvis walked to the edge of the stage and sat down on the steps, bringing himself closer to the audience. Love Me Tender began as it always did. Gentle. Intimate. Elvis's voice wrapped around the lyrics like a caress. But as he sang, something extraordinary was happening in the front row. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, sat with her grandmother. She had been battling leukemia for 2 years. Her name was Sarah Chen, and this concert was her wish. Her grandmother had saved every penny for months to buy front-row tickets, knowing this might be Sarah's last chance to see her hero. Elvis noticed her immediately. Her small bald head was covered by a bright yellow scarf, but her eyes, those eyes were filled with a light that seemed to cut through all the darkness in the world. She was mouthing along to every word, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from pure joy. Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go. Elvis sang directly to her now, though the rest of the audience didn't realize it yet. His voice began to waver. The professional facade was cracking. And then Sarah did something that changed everything. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a letter. With trembling hands, she held it up toward Elvis. Even from the stage, he could see her name written in crayon on the envelope. For Elvis, love Sarah. Elvis stopped singing. The music continued behind him, but his voice had completely stopped. The arena fell into confused silence as 15,000 people watched the king of rock and roll struggle to continue. Band members looked at each other uncertainty. What was happening? Elvis stood up slowly and walked down the stage steps directly to Sarah. Security moved to intercept, but Elvis waved them off. The arena was now in complete silence except for the sound of his footsteps. He knelt down in front of the little girl and took the letter from her hands. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them that transcended performance, transcended fame, transcended everything except pure human connection. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elvis whispered, his voice picked up by the stage microphones and broadcast throughout the arena. "Sarah," she whispered back, her voice barely audible but somehow filling the entire space. Elvis opened the letter. Inside, in a child's handwriting, were just a few lines. "Dear Elvis, I am very sick but your music makes me happy. When I hear Love Me Tender I think of my mama in heaven. Can you sing it for her too? Love, Sarah." Subscribe and comment now, because what happens next is the most heartbreaking and beautiful moment in rock and roll history. Elvis read the letter once, then twice. His hands were shaking. When he looked up at Sarah, tears were flowing freely down his face. Without saying a word, he reached up and took off his signature scarf, the one he wore at every concert, the one that had become part of his legend. Gently he removed Sarah's yellow scarf and replaced it with his own. The silk felt cool against her head, and it smelled like his cologne and the stage lights and something indefinable that was purely Elvis. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking, "this is for you and your mama both." And then Elvis did something unprecedented. He sat down right there on the floor of the arena, cross-legged like a child, and began to sing, "Love Me Tender," again. But this time, it wasn't a performance. It was a prayer. His voice was raw, unpolished, completely vulnerable. Every word was directed at this little girl who was fighting the biggest battle of her young life. The arena had never been quieter. 15,000 people were witnessing something sacred. "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill." Elvis sang the words like a lullaby, like a promise, like a goodbye. Sarah's grandmother was openly weeping. Security guards were wiping their eyes. Even the heart and sound technicians in the booth were struggling to maintain their composure. But the most incredible thing was happening throughout the arena. One by one, people began to stand. Not to cheer or applaud, but in respect. In recognition that they were witnessing something far more important than entertainment. But here's the part of the story that's almost impossible to believe. The part that shows who Elvis Presley really was beneath all the fame and glitter and mythology. As Elvis finished the song, Sarah reached up and touched his face. Her small hand on his cheek, and she whispered something that only he could hear. Later, when pressed by reporters, Elvis would never reveal what she said. He took that secret with him to his grave. What we do know is what happened next. Elvis stood up, helped Sarah to her feet, and then did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He picked her up and carried her onto the stage. This tiny girl in his signature scarf, held gently in the arms of the most famous man in the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice steady now, filled with purpose. "I want you to meet my friend Sarah. She's braver than any soldier, stronger than any champion, and she has something to teach all of us about what really matters in life." The crowd erupted, but not in the usual screaming frenzy. This was different. This was 15,000 people united in something deeper than fandom. This was love in its purest form. Elvis set Sarah down gently in a chair that had been brought onto the stage. "Now," he said, "I'm going to sing some more songs, and Sarah is going to help me. Because sometimes the best performances come from the heart, not from practice." What followed was unlike any concert Elvis had ever given. With Sarah beside him on stage, he sang with a tenderness and authenticity that cut through all his years of showmanship. He sang, "Can't Help Falling in Love," while holding her hand. He performed gospel songs that brought the house down with their spiritual power. Every song was a gift, not just to Sarah, but to everyone who was lucky enough to be there. Between songs, Elvis would lean down and whisper to Sarah, making her giggle. The audience could see this gentle, paternal side of Elvis that few had ever witnessed. This wasn't the hip-swiveling rock and roll rebel. This was a man connecting with an innocent child facing unimaginable challenges. The concert ran over by more than an hour, but nobody left. Nobody wanted this magical evening to end. When Elvis finally announced the last song, the crowd was both exhilarated and heartbroken. "I want to end tonight," Elvis said, "with a song that means everything to me. And I want to dedicate it to Sarah, to her grandmother, And to everyone who's ever loved someone so much it hurts. He began. Love me tender. One more time. But now, Sarah was singing along, her small voice barely audible but somehow carrying throughout the arena. The crowd joined in, 15,000 voices singing together in perfect harmony. It was a moment of pure magic, the kind that reminds you why music exists in the first place. When the song ended, Elvis knelt down beside Sarah one more time. He whispered something to her that made her nod solemnly. Then he stood, raised her hand in the air like she had just won a championship, and the arena exploded in applause that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Share this story and subscribe, because this is how legends are really made, not through fame or fortune, but through moments of genuine human compassion. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Elvis walked Sarah and her grandmother backstage. What happened in those private moments? Only they would ever know. But witnesses said that when they emerged, both Elvis and Sarah's grandmother were crying, and Sarah was clutching something new, a small, golden pendant that Elvis had worn around his neck. That pendant would become Sarah's most treasured possession. Not because it was expensive, but because it represented a night when the biggest star in the world stopped being a star and became simply a human being who cared. The story should end there, with that perfect moment of connection. But life, as always, is more complicated than our perfect moments. 3 weeks later, Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland. The world mourned the loss of the king of rock and roll. But Sarah mourned the loss of something more personal, a friend who had seen her not as a sick child, but as a complete human being worthy of love and attention. Sarah's battle with leukemia continued for another year. During her treatments, she would hold on to Elvis's scarf and pendant, drawing strength from the memory of that magical night. Her doctors later said they had never seen a child face such difficult treatments with such grace and courage. Sarah passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in the spring of 1978. She was holding Elvis's pendant, and according to her grandmother, her last words were, "Tell Elvis I'll see him soon, and I'll save him a seat in the front row." The story could end with sadness, but that's not what this story is about. This story is about the power of genuine human connection. About how one moment of authentic caring can ripple outward in ways we never expect. At Sarah's funeral, something extraordinary happened. Word had gotten out about her connection to Elvis, and fans from all over the country came to pay their respects. They didn't come as fans of Elvis Presley the star. They came as people who had been touched by the story of Elvis Presley the human being. Sarah's grandmother, in her grief, decided to do something that would honor both Sarah's memory and Elvis's kindness. She established a foundation in Sarah's name, dedicated to granting wishes for terminally ill children who wanted to meet their heroes. The first donation came from Elvis's estate. Priscilla Presley had heard the story and wanted to continue what Elvis had started. The Sarah Chen Foundation has now granted over 10,000 wishes. Children have met athletes, actors, musicians, and heroes of all kinds. But every wish granted carries with it the memory of that night in Las Vegas when a scared little girl met her hero, and he showed her that heroes are real. Elvis's scarf and pendant were donated to the foundation, where they remain on display with a simple plaque. In memory of Sarah Chen and Elvis Presley, who taught us that love really is tender, and that the smallest gestures can change the world. Today, more than 40 years later, that concert is remembered not for the songs Elvis sang, but for the moment he stopped singing and started caring. It's remembered as the night when 15,000 people learned that true royalty isn't about crowns or titles. It's about how you treat the most vulnerable among us. Music critics have called it Elvis's greatest performance, not because of his vocal technique or stage presence, but because it revealed the man behind the legend. A man who could see a sick child in a crowd of thousands and choose love over showmanship. The bootleg recordings of that concert are among the most sought after in rock and roll history. Not by collectors looking for rare Elvis material, but by people who want to hear what love sounds like when it's performed without pretense. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that night isn't found in recordings or foundations or plaques. It's found in the countless stories of people who have heard this story and been inspired to act with kindness in their own lives. Teachers who give extra attention to struggling students. doctors who take time to really listen to their patients, parents who put down their phones to truly engage with their children. Because that's what Sarah and Elvis teach us, that in a world full of noise and distraction and shallow celebrity, the most powerful thing any of us can do is to see another person, really see them, and choose to care. Elvis Presley died young, but he left behind more than music. He left behind proof that tenderness is not weakness, that vulnerability is not failure, and that sometimes the most important performance of your life happens when you stop performing altogether. The king of rock and roll became something even greater that night in Las Vegas. He became a reminder that we are all capable of extraordinary kindness if we just have the courage to let our hearts break open in the presence of another person's pain. And that, perhaps, is the most tender love of all.